There are moments in life when the weight of the world seems to settle on one person's shoulders. Moments that test not only their strength but their dignity. And sometimes, in the darkest corners of those moments, something extraordinary is waiting. Something no one could ever expect. This is the story of Emma, a single mother who faced the cruelty of humiliation but discovered that even pain can open the door to love, respect, and a future brighter than she ever imagined. Emma had always been a fighter. Life had not been kind to her. Raising her little boy, Daniel, on her own after his father walked out on them, she carried the responsibility of both parents. She worked 2 jobs, stretched every dollar until it nearly tore, and still found a way to make her son smile. But despite her strength, there were days when the world reminded her just how difficult her circumstances were. One chilly afternoon, after finishing her shift at a local diner, Emma took Daniel by the hand and walked into a well-known clothing store downtown. The store's window displayed mannequins dressed in coats far too expensive for her budget. But Daniel needed a jacket. Winter was coming fast, and Emma refused to let her son shiver through the cold. She entered the store quietly, hoping no one would notice her worn shoes or the patches on her own coat. Inside, she browsed the racks carefully, searching for the clearance section. Daniel's eyes lit up when he spotted a bright red jacket with a hood that made him look like a little explorer. He pulled it from the rack, his smile wide. "Mom, look, can I try it on?" Emma's heart swelled at his excitement. She checked the price tag, her chest tightening when she saw it. It was more than she had planned to spend. She tried to hide her hesitation from Daniel, but he noticed. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly, putting the jacket back. But Emma couldn't let that smile disappear. She grabbed the jacket again, determined to at least try to find a way. She carried it toward the register, standing in line behind neatly dressed customers who eyed her and Daniel with curiosity. The cashier, a young woman with sharp eyes and a smirk that carried judgment, scanned the jacket. "That will be $99, the cashier said flatly. Emma swallowed. She opened her wallet, counting the crumpled bills she had carefully saved. She didn't have enough. She looked up nervously and asked, "Do you have a discount section? Maybe something similar, but less expensive?" The cashier rolled her eyes. "If you can't afford it, maybe you shouldn't be shopping here in the first place." The words struck like knives. Heads turned, people whispered. Daniel tugged at his mother's sleeve, his little eyes confused and embarrassed. Emma's cheeks burned with shame, but she held her ground, trying to stay composed for her son. "I just wanted to know if there was something within my budget," she said softly. The cashier smirked. "Well, maybe try the thrift store down the street. That's probably more your style." Laughter came from a few people in line. Emma felt her throat tighten, her dignity slipping away in front of strangers. She put the jacket down slowly, holding Daniel's hand as she turned to leave, whispering to him, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll find something else." But what Emma didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire scene unfold. At the top of the staircase leading to the second floor, a man stood with a storm in his eyes. His name was Alexander Hayes, the owner of the store, a man who had inherited the business from his father and spent years turning it into one of the most successful shops in town. He was known for his sharp suits, his wealth, and his no-nonsense demeanor. But beneath his polished exterior, he carried something else, a heart capable of compassion, though he rarely showed it. As Emma walked out, Alexander felt something stir inside him. The humiliation she endured, the way she carried herself with quiet strength despite the cruelty, and the innocence of the boy clutching her hand. It struck him deeply. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew what he had witnessed was wrong. That night, Emma put Daniel to bed, whispering promises that she would find him a warm jacket soon. She sat at the kitchen table of their small apartment, head in her hands, fighting back tears. The words from the cashier replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. She had faced many hardships before, but this was different. It had stolen a piece of her dignity, something she had always tried to protect. But destiny has a way of intervening when we least expect it. The very next morning, as Emma was walking Daniel to school, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The tinted window rolled down, and to her shock, the man from the store stepped out. Alexander Hayes stood before her, dressed in a tailored coat, his presence commanding yet unexpectedly gentle. "Miss Emma, isn't it?" he asked, his voice steady but sincere. Emma froze, clutching Daniel's hand tighter. "Yes," she said cautiously. "I owe you an apology," Alexander began, his eyes locking onto hers. "What happened yesterday in my store was unacceptable. You were treated unfairly, and I take full responsibility for it. Please, allow me to make it right." Emma shook her head, her pride rising to the surface. "You don't need to do anything. People like me are used to this kind of treatment. No one should be used to humiliation," Alexander said firmly. "Especially not someone as strong as you." Those words, spoken with such conviction, disarmed her. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he cared, but something in his gaze told her he meant every word. Daniel, sensing the tension, looked up and asked innocently, "Are you the man from the store?" Alexander smiled softly and bent down to Daniel's level. "Yes, I am. And I'm very sorry for what you and your mom went through. I promise you, it won't happen again." For the first time in a long time, Emma felt something shift. She didn't realize it then, but this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would take her from shame to dignity, from loneliness to love, and from despair to a future she had never dared to imagine. Because sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are born in the most unexpected of places, even in the shadow of humiliation. Emma didn't know what to say. The last thing she expected that morning was to see the owner of the store standing before her, apologizing. She had lived so long on the edge of survival that she had grown used to swallowing her pain quietly, never expecting the world to care. And now here was this man, tall, confident, someone who clearly came from a world so different from hers, telling her she didn't deserve humiliation. "Mr. Hayes," she said cautiously, her voice calm but tinged with suspicion. "I appreciate your apology, but I really don't want pity. I just want to live my life and take care of my son." Alexander studied her, his sharp eyes softening. He had dealt with countless people in his business, customers, investors, employees, but none had struck him the way she did. There was dignity in her even after the cruel words, a quiet strength that reminded him of something he thought he had lost. "This isn't pity," he said gently. "It's accountability. I should have intervened sooner, and I want to make it right, not just with words, but with actions." Emma shook her head, clutching Daniel's small hand tighter. "And what does that mean? Are you going to hand me a gift card, so I can go back into your store and face those same stares again?" Her words were sharp, but Alexander didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly. "No, I'd like to personally invite you back. Just you and Daniel. My staff will treat you with the respect you deserve, or they'll no longer have a place in my store. I'll make sure of it." Emma wanted to say no. Pride was the shield she carried, and she had learned to protect herself fiercely. But when she looked down at Daniel, who was still wearing his thin, outdated jacket, she hesitated. He deserved warmth. He deserved more than the life of constant sacrifice she had been forced to give him. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I'll think about it." Alexander nodded, understanding that her hesitation was not rudeness, but survival. "That's all I ask," he said before stepping back toward his car. "And for what it's worth, Miss Emma, you deserve more than you realize." That night, Emma sat at the small table in their kitchen, staring at the flickering light bulb above her head. Daniel was asleep in the other room, his little frame curled under a blanket too thin for the growing chill. She replayed Alexander's words over and over. There had been sincerity in his tone, something rare and disarming. And though she tried to convince herself otherwise, part of her wanted to believe him. 2 days later, Emma found herself standing once again at the doors of the grand store. Daniel held her hand, his excitement impossible to hide. He bounced on his toes, pointing at the mannequins in the window. "Mom, are we really going in again?" "Yes," she whispered almost to herself. "We're going in." Inside, the atmosphere was different. As they walked through the aisles, the same cashier who had humiliated her avoided her gaze, her face pale with shame. Other employees smiled politely, their voices soft and respectful. And then, as if by fate, Alexander appeared from the second floor, descending the staircase with quiet elegance. "Emma," he greeted warmly, his eyes lighting up when they fell on Daniel. "And you must be Daniel. I've been waiting for you." Daniel grinned shyly, hiding slightly behind his mother's leg. Alexander knelt down to his level again. "You know," he said with a conspiratorial tone, "we've got a jacket here that's just waiting for someone brave enough to wear it. I think it might even have your name on it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Really?" Alexander nodded. "But only if your mom says it's okay." Emma's chest tightened as she watched the exchange. For years, people had overlooked her, dismissed her, or treated her as invisible. But here was this wealthy man, the owner of the very store where she had been humiliated, treating her son like the most important person in the room. She gave a small nod and Daniel lit up. Alexander led them to a section where racks of children's coats hung neatly. He pulled out a red jacket, almost identical to the one Daniel had wanted before. Daniel tried it on, twirling around, his laughter echoing through the store. For a moment, the heaviness of their lives disappeared. "How does it feel?" Alexander asked. "Like I'm a superhero," Daniel exclaimed. Emma laughed softly, covering her mouth as tears pricked her eyes. It had been so long since she had seen her son this happy. Alexander noticed the glimmer in her eyes and spoke gently. "He looks perfect." At the register, when Emma reached for her wallet, Alexander stopped her. "This one is on me," he said firmly. Emma froze, her pride bristling. "No, I can't let you do that. I came here prepared to pay for something within my means." "I know you did," Alexander replied. "But this isn't charity. It's a gift from one person to another. You've worked hard for your son, harder than most can even imagine. Let me do this, just this once." Emma hesitated, torn between her pride and the joy shining on Daniel's face. Finally, she exhaled and nodded slowly. "Just this once," she whispered. Alexander smiled. Just this once. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes Alexander would invite them for hot chocolate at a cafe near the store. Other times, he would stop by the diner where Emma worked late shifts, sitting quietly in a booth, waiting until she had a break just to talk with her. Their conversations started cautiously, filled with polite exchanges. But soon, walls began to crumble. Emma discovered that beneath Alexander's wealth and reputation, there was a man who carried loneliness of his own. He confessed how the business world often left him surrounded by people who only saw his money, not his heart. Emma, in turn, shared her struggles, her fears of failing Daniel, and the strength it took to keep moving forward every day. One evening, after walking Emma and Daniel home, Alexander paused at the steps of their modest apartment building. "Emma," he said softly, "do you ever wonder why our paths crossed the way they did?" Emma looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, his voice thoughtful, "out of all the people in this city, why did I happen to be there that day, watching when you were treated so cruelly? Why did I feel something I haven't felt in years? Something that told me I couldn't just walk away." Emma's chest tightened, her heart racing with emotions she didn't want to name. "Maybe it was just coincidence," she whispered. "Or maybe," Alexander said, his gaze locking with hers, "it was something more." She didn't respond, but the way her eyes lingered on his gave him hope. What began as an apology was slowly becoming something deeper, something that neither Emma nor Alexander had been prepared for. Two souls from opposite worlds, drawn together not by convenience or circumstance, but by the undeniable spark of something extraordinary. And as the days passed, it became clear. This was only the beginning of a story that would challenge their fears, test their courage, and prove that love has a way of finding us in the most unexpected places. The days that followed seemed to blur into a quiet rhythm that neither Emma nor Alexander had expected. Their lives had been so different. Her world was filled with long shifts at the diner, the constant worry of bills, and the tender responsibility of raising Daniel alone, while his was a world of power, privilege, and endless opportunities. Yet, in the small spaces between those differences, something fragile and undeniable was beginning to grow. Emma found herself noticing the little things about Alexander. The way he always crouched down to Daniel's level when speaking to him, never towering over him with authority. The way he asked about her day as if it mattered more than the million-dollar deals waiting on his desk. And the way he never once made her feel less, even when she wore the same old coat or when her shoes were worn at the soles. But as much as she felt the warmth of his presence, there was also fear. Fear that this was temporary. Fear that one day she'd wake up and it would all vanish, leaving her with nothing but the echo of something she could never have. One late evening, after finishing her shift at the diner, Emma stepped outside to find Alexander waiting by his car. His presence startled her, though not in an unwelcome way. "You didn't have to wait for me," she said, pulling her thin sweater tighter around her shoulders. "I wanted to," Alexander replied. "It's late. You shouldn't be walking home alone." Emma gave him a weary smile. "I've been doing it for years. I'll survive." "I know you would," he said softly. "But you don't have to anymore. At least not while I'm around." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma looked away, her heart pounding. "Alexander," she whispered, "I can't afford to get used to this, to you. I've built my whole life around expecting nothing, because it's easier than hoping and being disappointed." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Emma, I'm not here to give you illusions. I'm here because I want to be, and if you'll let me, I'll prove to you that I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught in her throat. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, desperately, but the scars of her past made it hard to trust. Still, she let him walk her home that night, and the night after, and the night after that. Meanwhile, Daniel had quickly grown attached to Alexander. The boy's laughter whenever Alexander visited filled the small apartment with a joy Emma hadn't heard in years. One afternoon, Alexander surprised Daniel with a soccer ball, and the two spent hours in the small park nearby, playing until the sun dipped low on the horizon. Emma watched from a bench, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. She remembered the times when people had promised to help, only to vanish when things became inconvenient. She remembered the shame of rejection, the bitter taste of disappointment. She couldn't let Daniel go through that again. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, Daniel looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom," he said, "do you think Mr. Hayes will still be here when I'm older?" The question pierced her heart. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and kissed him gently. "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, "but I hope so." Across town, Alexander lay awake in his grand, empty home. The silence of his wealth pressed in on him, the marble floors and crystal chandeliers offering no comfort. He thought of Emma, her laughter, her resilience, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled despite everything. And he thought of Daniel, a boy who had unknowingly awakened something protective and tender inside him. Alexander realized something he hadn't expected. For years, he had been admired, envied, even pursued, but never for who he truly was. Emma was different. She had no interest in his wealth, no desire for the world he lived in. In fact, she seemed to hold herself back because of it. And for the first time, Alexander wanted to strip away the layers of his status, to show her the man beneath it all. The next day, Alexander arrived at the diner where Emma worked. She was startled to see him sitting in her section, dressed not in his usual tailored suit, but in a simple shirt and jeans. "You look different," she said, handing him a menu. "Is that good or bad?" he asked with a grin. She tilted her head, studying him. "Different doesn't always mean bad." He leaned forward, his eyes steady on hers. "Emma, I don't want you to see me as Alexander Hayes, the wealthy businessman. I want you to see me as just Alexander, a man who admires your strength more than anything else." Emma froze, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, to let down her guard, but the walls she had built were strong. "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. There are women out there who would give anything to be with you. Women who belong in your world. Why would you choose someone like me? Because, Alexander said softly, you don't want anything from me, and that makes me want to give you everything. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. For the first time, Emma felt the cracks in her walls widening, letting in a light she had long shut out. That evening, as they walked together through the quiet streets, Emma found herself smiling more freely, laughing at Alexander's stories, and feeling lighter than she had in years. And though she tried to suppress it, hope was beginning to bloom inside her heart. A dangerous, beautiful hope that perhaps, just perhaps, love could find her even in the most unlikely of places. But love is never without challenges. And as their bond grew stronger, so did the whispers around them. Customers at the diner began to gossip. Employees at the store exchanged looks. People from Alexander's world questioned his choices. And though he didn't care what they thought, Emma felt the weight of it pressing down on her. One night, unable to contain her fears any longer, Emma confronted him. Alexander, people are talking. They don't understand why someone like you would be with someone like me. And honestly, sometimes I don't either. I don't want to be your burden. I don't want Daniel to be your burden. He looked at her with an intensity that silenced her doubts. Emma, you and Daniel are not a burden. You're the very reason I feel alive again. Let them talk. Let the world stare. None of it matters to me. All that matters is what we choose to believe about each other. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "And what do you believe?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "I believe that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I believe that if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Emma stood frozen, her heart torn between fear and longing. Could she risk everything to believe in him? Could she allow herself and her son to step into a future that seemed too good to be true? The answer wasn't clear yet, but deep down, she knew this was no ordinary encounter. This was something rare, something extraordinary. And though the road ahead would be filled with challenges, Emma couldn't deny that her heart was beginning to want what her mind was too afraid to accept. And so, their story moved forward, two souls from different worlds, bound by something greater than circumstance, walking a path that would test their strength, redefine their dreams, and perhaps, in the end, show them what true love really means. The days that followed were filled with both promise and tension. Emma and Alexander's bond had grown undeniable, yet the shadows of doubt hovered over Emma's heart. Each moment of laughter with him, each tender glance he gave Daniel, felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. But the world outside wasn't so kind. The whispers that had begun in quiet corners now grew louder, slipping into Emma's ears no matter how much she tried to ignore them. At the diner, coworkers muttered under their breath. Customers who once greeted her with warm smiles now offered judgmental stares. Some even suggested that she was only with Alexander for his money, a cruel irony that cut deeper because she had never cared for his wealth. One evening, after her shift, Emma sat alone in the small apartment she called home. Daniel was asleep in the next room, and she stared at the flickering light bulb above her, tears brimming in her eyes. She had worked so hard to protect her son from pain, from disappointment. What if this ended the same way so many things had in her life, with loss, humiliation, and heartbreak? When Alexander came to see her that night, he immediately noticed the heaviness in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Emma hesitated, then whispered, "They're saying things, Alexander. People think I'm using you, that I'm some kind of charity case you decided to rescue. And maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world." Alexander stepped closer, his expression soft but resolute. "Emma, don't let their voices drown out the truth. What we have is real. I don't care what they say, and neither should you. But I do care," she confessed, her voice breaking, "because Daniel hears it. He might not say anything, but he feels it. And I can't let him grow up thinking his mother was a mistake in someone else's story." Alexander knelt before her, his hands gently taking hers. "Emma, listen to me. You're not a mistake. You're the best part of my story. And Daniel, he deserves to see what love looks like. Real love. That's what I want to give both of you." Her tears finally fell, but not from despair. From the fragile hope that his words always seemed to ignite in her heart. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could triumph over judgment, that happiness wasn't reserved for people born into better circumstances. Still, the struggle was real. And soon, it became clear that the resistance wasn't only from Emma's world. In Alexander's world, questions began to rise. His board of directors expressed concerns, subtly suggesting that his reputation might be tarnished by his association with a woman of Emma's background. At a formal event, whispers followed him wherever he went. Some people masked their disapproval with false smiles. Others were bold enough to say it outright. Emma didn't belong. One night, after an exhausting gala, Alexander sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel. For the first time, he felt the weight of the expectations tied to his name. But as he thought of Emma's tired smile, Daniel's laughter, and the warmth they had brought into his otherwise empty mansion, he knew there was no choice to be made. His heart had already chosen. The very next day, Alexander arrived at the diner again. Only this time, he didn't just sit quietly in her section. He stood before all the murmuring customers and asked to speak with Emma. Confused, Emma stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Alexander, what are you doing?" He looked around the room, his voice steady but strong. "I'm here to make something clear. To all of you who whisper, to all of you who think Emma doesn't belong with me, you're wrong. She is the kindest, strongest person I have ever known. She has worked harder than anyone in this room, and she has raised a son with more love than most people could ever imagine. If anyone here has a problem with her, then they have a problem with me." The diner fell silent. Emma stood frozen, her face burning with both shock and emotion. She had never expected Alexander to defend her so openly, to stand against judgment not with anger, but with truth. When they stepped outside, Emma's voice trembled. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Alexander said simply, "I'm tired of watching you shrink yourself to fit into other people's boxes. Emma, you belong wherever you choose to be, and I want you by my side." Her heart swelled with emotions she could no longer suppress. In that moment, Emma realized that Alexander wasn't just saying words. He was showing her. He was proving that love wasn't about convenience or appearances. It was about courage, sacrifice, and standing together no matter who tried to tear them apart. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully, Emma sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets. She thought of everything she had endured, the loneliness, the humiliation, the endless struggle to survive. And now, here was a man who saw her not as less, but as more. A man who didn't just speak of love, but acted upon it. For the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to dream. Not the fragile dreams she used to push away, but bold, daring dreams of a future where happiness wasn't just for others. It could be hers, too. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Alexander was no longer just a fleeting presence in her life. He was becoming part of her world, and perhaps she was finally becoming part of his. What neither of them knew was that the greatest test of their love was still to come. A test that would force them to confront not only the world's judgment, but the deepest fears in Emma's own heart. Life, as it often does, began to weave threads of change in ways neither Emily nor Daniel could have predicted. Weeks had passed since that fateful afternoon in the store, and though the memory of humiliation still lingered in the corners of her mind, it was being gradually replaced with something far stronger. The warmth of unexpected kindness, the quiet bloom of respect, and a bond that deepened with every encounter. Emily had always believed that life had little to offer her beyond survival, but now, for the first time in years, she found herself waking with a sense of hope she had thought long dead. Daniel, on the other hand, found his life unraveling in the best of ways. Once consumed by spreadsheets, meetings, and the cold pursuit of profit, he now found himself distracted by the thought of a woman who had walked into his life carrying both dignity and pain. He replayed the first moment he truly saw her, not as the woman who had been humiliated, but as the mother holding her daughter's hand, standing tall despite the weight of struggle pressing down on her shoulders. That image haunted him, challenged him, and stirred something in his heart he could not explain away. Their meetings became more frequent, though always innocent in form. Sometimes it was Daniel showing up at the park where Emily often brought Lily after school. Other times, it was Emily passing by the store and being surprised by the small ways Daniel seemed to notice her. Whether it was saving aside a discounted bag of groceries for her, or simply smiling in a way that softened the edges of her tired soul. At first, Emily resisted. Life had taught her that kindness often came with strings attached, and she had been burned too many times to risk being charmed by a man who seemed to live in a world she could never belong to. She reminded herself constantly. He was wealthy. She was barely scraping by. He owned a store. She was barely a customer. He lived in comfort. She lived in sacrifice. But despite her resistance, she couldn't ignore the way his words carried no judgment, only curiosity and sincerity. She couldn't deny the way his laughter eased her burdens, or how Lily's face lit up whenever Daniel stopped to ask her about her drawings, treating her like the most important little girl in the world. It was on a rainy evening that things began to shift in a way Emily could no longer dismiss. She had left her small apartment after a long day, balancing groceries in one hand and holding Lily's umbrella with the other. The rain poured harder than expected, soaking through her coat. As she struggled to keep both the bags and her daughter dry, a familiar voice called out from across the street. "Emily!" Daniel ran through the downpour, holding his own umbrella, which he quickly positioned above both mother and daughter. Without asking, he took the grocery bags from her hand, shielding her with his frame. "You'll catch a cold," he said with genuine concern, ignoring the rain soaking his own shoulders. Emily blinked, startled by the suddenness of his presence, by the way he seemed less like a businessman and more like a protector in that moment. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Daniel interrupted softly, his eyes locking with hers. For a second too long, she held his gaze, and in it she saw no pity, no condescension, only sincerity and care. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Emily sat by the small window in her living room, watching the rain blur the city lights. Her mind returned again and again to the way Daniel had looked at her in the storm. It wasn't the look of a man who pitied her. It was the look of someone who saw her, truly saw her, beyond the layers of struggle and weariness. And that terrified her as much as it comforted her. Days later, Daniel surprised her again. This time, it wasn't with an umbrella or a smile, but with an invitation. He showed up at her door nervous, almost uncharacteristically so, and asked if she and Lily might join him for dinner at a small family-owned restaurant he loved. Emily hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to say no, to protect the fragile walls she had built around her heart. But when she looked at Lily, whose eyes sparkled with excitement at the thought of going out, she found herself nodding. The dinner was simple, unpretentious, and yet unforgettable. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she was part of something other than struggle. Daniel laughed easily with Lily, asked her questions about her favorite colors, her favorite stories, and even leaned in to admire the crayon drawings she proudly showed him from her little backpack. He never once made Emily feel small. Instead, he drew her into the conversation with genuine interest, asking about her dreams, her childhood, her hopes for the future. It was during dessert, a modest slice of pie shared between the three of them, that Emily realized something she had been denying for weeks. She was beginning to care for him in ways she never thought possible again. Yet with that realization came fear. Fear of what it meant. Fear of the differences between their worlds. Fear of what people would say if they knew a wealthy store owner had fallen for a woman who could barely afford her groceries. That night, after returning home, Emily sat at her kitchen table long after Lily had fallen asleep, her heart torn between the desire to protect herself and the yearning to let someone in. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself lying awake in his large, quiet house, staring at the ceiling. He had built his life on order, on predictability, on success measured by numbers. But all of that seemed meaningless compared to the sound of Emily's laughter, the light in Lily's eyes, the way it felt to sit at that table and belong to something real. He knew he was falling in love, and though it scared him too, he also knew he could not turn away. As the days passed, the bond between them deepened. Daniel began to find excuses to spend time with Emily and Lily, not as a benefactor or a store owner, but simply as a man who wanted to be near them. And Emily, despite her fears, found herself letting down her walls little by little. She saw the way Daniel treated her daughter with patience and tenderness, the way he never tried to change her or shame her for her circumstances. He didn't see her as broken. He saw her as strong, resilient, and beautiful in ways she had forgotten to believe. But not everyone approved. There were whispers in the community, raised eyebrows from those who saw them together. Some said Emily was only interested in Daniel's wealth. Others warned Daniel that a woman like her would only drag him down. The pressure from outside voices weighed heavily on Emily, who already doubted her worth. More than once, she considered pulling away, convincing herself that he deserved someone better, someone who could match his world. Yet Daniel refused to let those whispers define them. One evening, when Emily tried to distance herself, telling him she didn't want to ruin his reputation, he took her hands firmly in his and said, "Do you think I care about reputation? Emily, I care about you. I care about Lily. And I'm not going to walk away because people talk. Let them talk. I know who you are. And I know what I feel." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not because of the words alone, but because of the way he said them with conviction, with unwavering truth. For the first time in years, someone wasn't ashamed to stand beside her. And so, despite the odds, despite the doubts and the whispers, their story continued to unfold. What began as humiliation in front of a store was slowly transforming into something Emily had once believed impossible. Love that was pure, love that was healing, love that gave her back the dignity and worth she had thought she'd lost forever. What she didn't yet know was that this love was not only going to change her life, but Daniel's as well, forever. The seasons shifted, carrying with them the quiet passage of time and the steady deepening of something Emily never thought she'd have again. Love that felt safe, love that felt true. What began with humiliation outside a store had blossomed into evenings filled with laughter, mornings touched with hope, and a little girl's world that seemed brighter with every passing day. Yet even as joy grew, shadows of doubt lingered. Emily often asked herself if happiness like this could really last, or if it was just another fleeting moment before life reminded her of her place. She remembered too clearly the sting of being judged, the shame of being dismissed because she didn't have enough money in her pocket. Could love really be strong enough to bridge the distance between her world and Daniel's? Daniel, however, had no such doubts. If anything, the months had only clarified what he had known from the very beginning. Emily was the one who had changed him, who had given his life new meaning. He no longer cared for the shallow applause of success, the empty satisfaction of numbers in a bank account. What mattered was the way Emily's hand felt in his, the way Lily looked up to him with trust and affection, the way a simple dinner in their tiny apartment could fill him with more joy than a lavish party ever had. He knew what he wanted, and he was ready to risk everything to keep it. It was on a crisp autumn evening, beneath a canopy of golden leaves, that Daniel finally decided to reveal the depth of his heart. He invited Emily and Lily to the park, insisting they bring nothing but themselves. Emily, slightly suspicious but amused, agreed. When they arrived, they were met with a quiet scene that made Emily stop in her tracks. Daniel had prepared a small picnic beneath the largest oak tree, its branches stretching like arms around them. There was nothing extravagant, just a blanket, a basket with sandwiches and fruit, and 2 lanterns casting a soft glow as dusk fell. But it was the simplicity that touched her most. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice filled with surprise. "For you," Daniel said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "For both of you." Lily squealed with delight, running to the blanket and plopping herself down as if it were the greatest adventure she'd ever been on. Emily laughed, shaking her head, though her heart swelled with something far greater than amusement. They ate, they talked, and they watched the sun set behind the trees. For a while, everything felt timeless, as if the world had paused just for them. But as the sky darkened, Daniel's demeanor grew more serious. "Emily," he began, his voice low but steady, "I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. She braced herself, afraid that the happiness she had found was about to be ripped away. He reached across the blanket, taking her hands gently in his. "The day I saw you in front of my store, the day I realized what had happened, I felt ashamed. Not of you, but of myself. Ashamed that I had allowed a place with my name on it to make someone like you feel small. That moment changed me, Emily. It forced me to see beyond numbers, beyond appearances. And then, getting to know you, it gave me something I didn't even know I was missing." Emily blinked back tears, her throat tightening. "I don't care about the differences people see between us," Daniel continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "I care about the way you hold yourself with dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. I care about the way you love your daughter with every piece of your soul. I care about the way you've made me a better man without even trying." Emily's tears fell freely now, her heart racing as she whispered, "Daniel." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple ring, nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious. Just a band that shone with sincerity. "I don't want to just stand by your side, Emily. I want to build a life with you, with both of you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, silence filled the park, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Emily's breath caught, her mind racing with memories of every struggle, every humiliation, every moment she had told herself she wasn't worthy of love like this. And yet, here was a man kneeling before her, not because of pity, not because of guilt, but because he saw her, truly saw her. Before she could answer, Lily clapped her hands excitedly, exclaiming, "Say yes, Mommy! Say yes!" Emily laughed through her tears, the sound trembling but filled with joy. She cupped Daniel's face in her hands, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes glistening. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he never intended to let go. Lily joined them, wrapping her little arms around both of them. And in that embrace, Emily realized something she had never dared to believe. She was home. Word of their engagement spread quickly, and while the whispers returned, some supportive, others filled with jealousy or judgment, Emily no longer cared. She had spent too long living under the weight of other people's opinions. Now, she had love, she had respect, and she had a future that felt brighter than anything she had ever imagined. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the same park where Daniel had proposed. Friends, a few family members, and loyal employees from the store gathered to witness a union that was less about wealth and more about love's triumph over hardship. Emily walked down a simple aisle with Lily by her side, her daughter's smile wide enough to light the entire day. Daniel stood waiting, his eyes filled with pride and adoration, as though no one else existed in the world but the woman walking toward him. When they exchanged vows, Emily's voice shook, but her words carried the weight of a lifetime. "I once believed love like this was not meant for me," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But you showed me that I am more than my struggles, more than my past. You taught me that I am worthy of being loved, fully and completely. And I promise to spend the rest of my life proving to you that your love was never misplaced." Daniel, holding her hands tightly, replied with words that silenced even the whispers. "Emily, I don't just love you, I admire you. You've shown me what strength truly looks like. I promise to honor you, to protect you, and to cherish you, not because I have to, but because I cannot imagine life without you." The kiss they shared sealed not just a marriage, but the transformation of two lives that had once been worlds apart. Years later, people still remembered the story of Emily and Daniel. Some remembered the humiliation she had endured in front of the store, but most remembered what came after. The apology, the courage, the love that defied expectation. And in their home, laughter echoed through the halls. Lily grew up knowing the meaning of unconditional love, and Emily woke every morning with gratitude for the life she had never thought possible. The surprise was not just that a wealthy store owner had fallen in love with a struggling single mother. The surprise was how love had turned humiliation into redemption, how it had given two broken souls the chance to heal together, and how it had created a family born not of convenience, but of courage, forgiveness, and faith in the unexpected. Emily had once stood on a sidewalk, humiliated, judged, and unseen. Now she stood in a home filled with love, with a husband who adored her, a daughter who thrived, and a heart that finally knew peace. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all was that the very moment she thought was her lowest, her most painful, was the moment that led her to everything she had ever dreamed of.